Hello, everybody. Today we are going to recap everything that's happened in Big Brother 25 up to week 3. In case you haven't been caught up with the episodes, in case you have been watching the live feeds, we're here to cover everything that you've been missing. I do have a week 1 recap already up. So in this episode, we're going to go through the week 1, but we're going to more talk about the important themes and things that were important in week 1 that will come into week 2 as opposed to just recapping the entire week. So check that out if you want to be caught up to speed for week 1. But otherwise, we're going to get right into it. This has been a really fun season. And I don't actually think the episodes have been great at conveying that these house guests have been gaming like 24/7 every day. And I think that the episodes have told a little bit of the story, but we're not getting the full personalities of all of these house guests. So I'm having a lot of fun this season, and I hope that in this recap you can kind of tell why this season has been a lot of fun. All right, we're gonna go right into week 1. Week 1 here. Riley wins HOH, and there's been a twist. I won't go too much into that, but because of the twist, instead of nominating 2 people for eviction, she's given the option to save 2 of 4 possible house guests from being on the block, and she chooses to save Jared and Corey, meaning that Kirsten and Felicia are left on the block. Right away, we start to see 2 sides of the house begin to form. There's the professors, who Sari did a lot of work to forge and bring together, and family style. The veto is played, and Heisem wins the first power of veto of the season. He chooses not to use it, so one of Kirsten or Felicia will be going home. Around this point, Cameron, who was aligned with family style, really begins to feel like his alliance is starting to fall apart. And after he's tipped off that Jared and Corey might be working with the other side of the house, he starts to make his moves to jump ship and try to flip sides. And an important part of this is that he is really close with Riley. And I think a better way to put it is he has this sort of weird infatuation with her that's tethered between a father daughter relationship and a showmance, or at least that's what it is in his mind. So when Cameron begins to have conversations with the other side of the house, it really becomes clear that not only is he sabotaging family style, but he's also kind of trying to force Riley into also flipping with him by sabotaging family style. This ultimately ends up really backfiring on Riley, who was pretty cemented in with Jag, Blue, and Matt and that side of the house. Ultimately, Cameron doesn't exactly tell the other side anything they don't already know. Jared, who's Cerie's son, has already exposed family style to the professors. It does start to connect Riley and Cameron as a duo, though, and untrustworthy. And while Riley didn't exactly do herself any favors by telling people who she was working with throughout her HOH run, who she wanted to target, and she basically spent most of her time chilling in the HOH room. In spite of all of that, Cameron really didn't help her here, and he kind of accelerates her as a target going into the next week. I also just think it's important to note because the episodes kind of skip over Cameron's role up to this point. They haven't really touched much on his borderline emotionally abusive, definitely toxic at minimum relationship with Riley, and they don't give you a lot of context onto why Cameron's not really well liked by the other side of the people, by the other side of the house, or really just by the people in the house in general. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but in case you missed it, Luke got expelled for the house from the house for saying the N word. It's not super important because he was basically irrelevant in the house, and it also had no impact in the game whatsoever. But I just thought I'd mention it because it did happen. Okay, fast forward. Kirsten is evicted. It's unanimous, and we know it's final because Julie reveals to her that Cirie is Jared's mom.
Cirie is Jared's mother. Oh. Oh.
The next HOH happens, and Heisem is your new HOH. And Heisem immediately makes it known that Riley is his target. She'd said to others that Heisem was a target of hers, and he becomes hell bent on making sure she is the one to go home and that the other side of the house is put on blast. He has his one on ones, and he really grills the other side of the house, demanding they tell him who they're working with, the name of their alliance. And he also tells Riley very awkwardly that she is his target, but it's really at this point that Heisem's interpersonal communication skills are starting to rub people the wrong way. Everybody is starting to notice the power getting to his head, and they're also starting to pinpoint some of the ways he's indirectly trying to manipulate others. For instance, he's very forward in saying that he doesn't want to backdoor anybody and is giving them the chance to play in veto because he plays an honest game and that's the honorable thing to do. But it's also kind of obvious that he's just trying to set a tone that he's hoping other people will follow. He's very quickly becoming a backdoor candidate for a lot of the house guests. He's won 2 of the 3 competitions that have been played, and he also got second place in the other one he's competed in. He benefits the most if all the house guests commit to an honorable, no backdoor policy approach to the game, and they're starting to pinpoint that that's what he's doing. It's not rocket science. Moving on, Hisam nominates Riley and Cameron. The reason I wanted to point out all the stuff with Cameron's behavior earlier in the video was because even though it's not a surprise to anybody in the house that Cameron is a nominee, it comes up kind of out of the blue in the actual episodes that they put out. Instead, production really pushes forward Matt as the likely person to go up next to Riley, and they're sure to highlight this like budding showmance that him and Riley kind of had as the primary reason. I do think there was like a little bit of a flirtmance. Matt was probably definitely thought she was attractive, but this wasn't something that was like significant in the actual house. And I think that Riley was just very close to Matt, and Matt was really close to Riley because he depended on her to help kind of translate what was happening in the house in real time. When they draw the names for the veto competition, Riley hits the jackpot because Blue, Matt, and America are all picked to play in the veto competition, and all would likely use the veto to save her. The veto competition ended up being a timed hearing competition where the house guests needed to spin record players in order to discern clues said to them through a pair of headphones. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I wanted to add that when the live feeds went down for them to compete in the veto competition, they did not come back up for 18 hours, which is a long time for the live feeds to be down. And when they finally did come back up, we were clued in from conversations from the house guests that there was definitely an issue that had to do with Matt's disability and competing in the competition. Matt is hard of hearing, if you didn't know, and he depends primarily on hearing aids and lip reading in order to understand what people are saying. And Big Brother up to this point has really dropped the ball on supporting him and making sure that they had the necessary accommodations in place for him to be able to compete in these competitions and just live in the Big Brother house fairly. I think it should have been blatantly obvious having a house guest who depends on lip reading and hearing aids would not be able to compete in the same way as other house guests at a timed hearing competition. They don't highlight this issue whatsoever in the actual episode. They kind of, make it seem like he was able to compete and there wasn't any issues. But it is something that was said in the house, and the house guests even at one point mentioned there's no way that Hisam would ever put Matt up, at least that week, because of this competition. But they don't talk about this in the episode. I do want to just point that out. I don't know. I just think that CBS, they needed to be better. When you have people from these underrepresented groups, these marginalized groups, people that you don't typically have on your show competing, you need to have done all the work beforehand to make sure that you're not putting these people in a position to embarrass themselves. That work needed to be done before, and clearly it hasn't been, and they need to catch up to speed like yesterday, because they've had Matt messed up several times this season. And I don't doubt that Matt will be the last person in Big Brother, however long the show goes on for. He's not going to be the last person with a disability to come onto the show. And they've already committed to half their cast being people of color. And there are things that you need to work on and change in that aspect too. So Big Brother, you need to be better yesterday. But we're going to move on. Now, in spite of all the odds against him, Hisam wins the power of veto. And yes, this is his 3rd competition win in a row out of 4 competitions this season. And if it wasn't obvious before, he chooses not to use the power of veto. And while it's not really shown on the actual episode, there were several conversations amongst the house guests around how hard Hisam had gone in on Riley during his veto speech. While the episodes only show about a minute of it, it was apparently closer to 4 to 5 minutes of him blaming Riley for splitting the house into 2, for preventing people from being able to make organic relationships in the house, and really cemented her as the person he hopes goes home this week, and he encourages others to vote her out. It was apparently very harsh, and so much so that he would kind of apologize to her about it later. This is all important because it's also around now where Cirie and Izzy begin to talk to each other about a possible flip. Cirie kind of danced around the idea of trying to gather votes to keep Riley. Cirie herself has had a pretty good relationship with Riley individually, and she wouldn't mind if Riley ended up staying. And it's at this point with Heisem beginning to really show himself as a strong competition player that Suri also starts to fixate on his place in the game, particularly how she thinks keeping Cameron might really benefit him, while evicting Riley takes away an ally of hers. So she and Izzy begin to float the idea of flipping the vote and blindsiding Heisem. And with Heisem really starting to rub people the wrong way, it actually picks up a lot of steam. So much so to the point that they pretty much had the vote flipped. And I think the majority of the people in the House were in agreement that saving Riley was the move, and they were willing to blindside Heisem to do it. But a day later, though, she realizes that Cameron actually isn't really that close with Heisem, and that he might even target Heisem if he gets into power. So as they talk more and more, and Siri really begins to realize that Heisem's position in the game really isn't as good as she thinks it is, the vote flips back to evicting Riley. And while it would kind of teeter back and forth the last day and a half, and the idea of keeping her would kind of stay in the conversation, they all pretty much on the professor's side, they all agree that keeping Riley is the path of least resistance. It's the best way to go. Riley ends up being the second house guest evicted from the Big Brother house. I'll say, while I was kind of rooting for a flip for Chaos's sake, even though I didn't think it was a particularly good move for Suri, I think that Riley didn't do herself a lot of favors in terms of working to stay. She did have the votes to stay at one point, but she was awful at campaigning to people not already in her alliance to keep her. She didn't spend a lot of time with people outside of her core group, and didn't do a good job of convincing others that she wouldn't just go back to that side of the house and work against them the next week. Overall, this was just a really fast-paced and crazy week of Big Brother. I feel like it's given us a hint of how the season could really look week to week. We might not get crazy flips every day like we did this week, but we are getting consistent gaming, and whatever the plan is on Thursday, I feel like at the very least, it's going to be pushed back against a bunch of times throughout the week, whether or not it's going to be what they end up doing at the end. I also think that this week really showcased a difference between Big Brother and Survivor in terms of the pacing, at the very least. Survivor is played in 3-day cycles, and it's overall a much more faster paced game than Big Brother. Big Brother is played in week-long cycles, and there's a lot more downtime in Big Brother. There's a lot more time for a plan that you make on Monday to unravel by Thursday when they evict somebody. And up to this point, it feels like Suri's been playing Survivor. Once she's set to a narrative, either to save somebody or to get rid of somebody, or to weaken somebody's position, she starts gaming right then and there. Even if it's Friday and the HOH was just announced, that's when she starts. And especially, I think, having Izzy as her closest ally next to Jared, Izzy's pretty chaotic too, so it kind of just feeds itself. She had the house flipped, if we're being real. She had the house flipped to keep Riley. And then, like, the same day, she's like, maybe we shouldn't flip. And then she goes and she flips the house again. And doing this so often as she did, or she's had up to this season, it's chaotic. She pretty much exposed how much influence she had on the house. She basically went out on a limb to try to blindside her own ally and her alliance, who is a comp beast, mind you. She pissed off a lot of her ally members in the process. Mimi was very frustrated with the back and forth, particularly just to the idea of flipping and blindsiding Heisem in the first place. Yet, I think she's still in a really good place in the house, which is so weird to say after that week, but you almost have to see it yourself. Cerie's trending upwards, and she was already pretty high. For the rest of the house, family style has dissolved, and towards the end of this week, we started to see Blue and America start to make stronger connections on the other side of the house, so I think that's something to keep an eye on, and I'm sure this will start to become important as we go deeper into the season. Matt lost his closest ally week 1 in Kirsten, and then he lost another ally who he was even closer to in week 2, in Riley. So he's lost his 2 closest allies, and he's been pretty torn up about it. But I think he's in a pretty safe spot still. The professors don't seem to want him out. Particularly, I think that Suri likes him. And Heisem and Cameron remain the 2 biggest targets, at least right now in the house. So I think that out of everybody else in the house, whatever iteration of HOH, whoever wins HOH, the most options fall for these two, one of these two being the one that goes home in the next few weeks. That is your catch up to speed for the first 2 weeks of Big Brother. Hopefully after watching this, you kind of have a good enough idea to just go straight into week 3 and kind of have an understanding of the lay of the house, who's strong, who's doing a lot of work. I do stream twice a week on Big Brother on Twitch, and there I do a lot more diving deep into the game as it's happening, and doing a lot of like house guest deep dives and talking about moves that are happening and what's important now. So I encourage you guys to go over to Twitch and follow me. We do it I think right now we're doing it every Monday and Friday, but that might change as the Big Brother schedule changes. But be sure to follow me there. Follow me on TikTok at kcdcooling.com. And thank you so much for watching.
Come on, I'll show up. Stop playing.